The stars outside shimmered against the vast backdrop of deep space while the alien ship raced through the quiet emptiness. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, filled with anxiety as a medical emergency unfolded in the dimly lit sickbay. Commander Nixari, the proud and fearsome leader of the vessel, lay unconscious on the examination table. Her body was bruised from a recent mission, and her breathing was shallow, labored. But the most dangerous issue had just been discovered: a clot in a delicate area of her body that only a human medic could treat. Nixari's crew had always been fiercely independent. They had relied on their advanced technology and medical expertise for centuries. And yet, in this moment, nothing they knew seemed to be enough. Their highly trained doctors, with years of experience, had never encountered a situation quite like this. The usual methods, the technology they had, were all rendered useless. The ship's doctor, Zorvok, a tall and angular alien with piercing blue eyes, stared at the monitor in disbelief. His fingers trembled as he flicked through the medical data, scanning for any possible solutions. "This is impossible," he muttered under his breath. He turned to his crew, whose faces mirrored his concern. They had always prided themselves on their medical advancements, and now they faced something they could not fix. Commander Nixari had been their leader for many years. She had led them through countless battles, forged alliances, and maintained order among the stars. To see her now, vulnerable and weak, was a blow to their pride. If she did not get the treatment she needed soon, they risked losing not just their leader, but possibly the entire crew. Without her strength, the morale of the entire ship could collapse. Zorvok's mind raced. He needed a solution, and fast. He reached for the communication system. "Prepare to make contact with the nearest human vessel," he ordered. "We have no choice but to ask for their help." The ship's communications officer, a quick-witted alien named Sori, hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the console. She knew that human relations with their kind had always been tense. The history between their species was filled with misunderstandings and conflict. But as much as she hated to admit it, Zorvok was right. They needed help, and the humans had something their medical technology did not. "Human vessel located," Sori finally said, her voice tight with the weight of the decision. She patched the transmission through. The screen flickered to life, and the face of a human medic appeared, Lieutenant Thomas Carter. His calm demeanor was a sharp contrast to the chaos unfolding on the alien ship. He was seated at a desk in his quarters, looking somewhat relaxed, though his eyes sharpened as he saw the urgency in the alien crew's faces. "Lieutenant Carter," Zorvok said, his voice strained. "We require your assistance immediately."
"Commander Nixari is critically injured, and we cannot treat her with our technology. Only a human medic can save her."
Carter's brow furrowed slightly. "I understand," he said, his tone steady but focused. "What exactly is the problem?" "A clot," Zorvok replied, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "In a delicate location. We have tried everything, but our methods are insufficient. We need you to board our ship and perform the procedure that only a human can." Carter took a deep breath. He wasn't unfamiliar with medical emergencies, but this was different. The aliens had always been wary of humans, and to be called upon in this way felt strange. Still, his training had taught him to put aside personal feelings and focus on the task at hand. "I'll be there," Carter said simply. He stood up and grabbed his medical kit. As a medic, he was no stranger to difficult situations, but the idea of treating an alien commander, especially one as powerful as Nixari, was daunting. Minutes later, Carter stepped onto the alien ship. The sterile white walls and strange alien designs of the interior made him feel like a small figure in an enormous, unfamiliar world. He was escorted to the sickbay by 2 alien soldiers, their expressions unreadable. They said nothing as they led him through the corridors, their eyes occasionally glancing toward him in suspicion. When they reached the medical bay, Carter's gaze immediately fell on Commander Nixari. She was unconscious, her face pale and strained. Her usually strong and commanding features were now softened, vulnerable. It was a sight that Carter had not expected, given her reputation as a fierce leader among her people. Zorvok was waiting for him, along with several other medical personnel.
"LT Carter,"
Zorvok said, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Thank you for coming. We have prepared everything we can. The commander's condition is critical, and only you can save her now." Carter nodded. "I understand," he said, his eyes never leaving Nixari's still form. "I need all the data you have on her condition, and I need to know everything about the procedure you attempted." Zorvok quickly handed over the medical records, and Carter scanned through them, his mind processing the information rapidly. The clot was in a location that could cause severe complications if not treated properly. The aliens' methods, though advanced, had failed because they lacked the precise human techniques necessary for such a delicate procedure. As Carter moved closer to Nixari, he felt the weight of the situation settle over him. This was not just a medical procedure. It was a diplomatic one. The aliens had no love for humans, but here he was, standing over their leader, ready to perform a procedure that could determine the fate of interspecies relations. If he succeeded, it could prove that humans were capable of more than just destruction. They were capable of saving lives, even those of their enemies. He took a deep breath and set to work. The medical team stood back, watching in silence as Carter prepared the necessary tools. His movements were precise and controlled, but there was a quiet sense of tension in the room. Everyone knew that the procedure would not be easy, and failure was not an option. As Carter worked, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. He could feel the eyes of the alien crew on him, their judgment and skepticism weighing heavily on him. But he pushed the thoughts aside. This wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about saving Nixari's life, and that was all that mattered. The procedure was slow, requiring every ounce of his medical expertise. He carefully navigated the delicate area where the clot had formed, using techniques that humans had perfected over centuries. It was painstaking work, and Carter's concentration never wavered. The tension in the room grew with every passing minute, and the silence was almost deafening. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Carter's work was done. He stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. The clot had been removed, and Nixari's vitals were stabilizing. Her breathing, which had been shallow and erratic, began to return to normal. Zorvok, who had been watching anxiously, let out a relieved breath. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You saved her." Carter nodded, his expression neutral, but inside he felt a wave of relief. He had done what needed to be done. And though the alien crew may have been skeptical of him before, now they had no choice but to respect his skills. As Nixari began to stir, her eyes fluttered open, and Carter was the first face she saw. There was no sign of the fierce, unyielding commander she once was. Just a woman, vulnerable and thankful.
"You," Nixari's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You saved me."
Carter gave her a small nod. "It's my job." But Nixari's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. There was something in her eyes now, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even respect. It was a small shift, but it was enough. As she slowly sat up, the room held its breath. The tension had not entirely disappeared, but for the first time, there was a flicker of something else, something new, something that might change everything. The atmosphere in the sickbay remained thick with tension, but for the first time since Lieutenant Carter had arrived on the alien ship, the crew seemed to exhale in relief. Commander Nixari was alive, breathing steadily, and the immediate danger had passed. Yet as the hours passed, it became clear that the situation was far from over. Nixari, though awake, was still weak. She sat up in her bed, her eyes closed, leaning back against the medical cushions, trying to regain her strength. Her once powerful body was now frail, and the events of the past few hours had left her shaken. She had always been the one in control, the one to give orders and dictate the course of action. To be in a position where she needed help, especially from a human, was an affront to her pride. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at Lieutenant Carter, who was standing across the room, adjusting his medical tools. She had never imagined a situation where she would need a human's help, let alone trust one to save her life. But there he was, standing there with calm confidence, his expression neutral, as if saving her had been nothing more than another day on the job. For a long time, they simply stared at each other, neither speaking. Nixari's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, ranging from frustration to disbelief. She had always seen humans as a lesser species, with their short lifespan, their limited understanding of the universe, and their warlike tendencies. She had never imagined that one of them would stand in front of her, the leader of a mighty empire, and perform a procedure that saved her life. As much as she hated to admit it, Carter had proven himself. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to control every situation. Yet now, her life had been saved by a human. It was a thought she couldn't quite process. "You did what none of our doctors could," Nixari finally said, her voice soft but firm. There was no warmth in her words, no gratitude, only a grudging acknowledgement of what he had done.
I do not understand how.
Our medical technology should have been sufficient. Carter met her gaze, his face still calm, though a slight frown formed as he processed her words. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "But sometimes technology can only do so much. There are things that human medicine is better at, just as there are things your species' technology excels at." "I'm just here to do my job, Commander." Nixari narrowed her eyes slightly, her pride still bruised. "My species' technology," she repeated, as if tasting the words. It wasn't often that anyone, even a fellow alien, reminded her of the limitations of her people's science. She felt exposed, vulnerable, not just physically but emotionally. She had relied on her people's advancements for everything. To be forced into a position of dependence on a human, no less, felt like an unforgivable weakness. "Do not mistake my respect for what you've done for approval of your species," she added, her voice suddenly cold. "I still do not trust humans." Carter didn't flinch at her words. He had heard the stories. He had seen how his people were viewed by others. He knew that this was not just about his skill as a medic. It was about the long, complicated history between their species. Humans and aliens had fought wars, clashed over territory, and failed to understand each other for centuries. There was no easy way to erase the history of conflict that separated them. "I understand," Carter said simply. "And I don't expect you to change your mind overnight. I'm not here to change how you feel about humans. I'm here to make sure you get better. Nothing more." Nixari looked at him, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She was used to being the one in charge, the one who made the decisions. But in this moment, she was not in control. It was a position she hated. She had always been the one giving orders, never the one to receive them, and yet, here she was, dependent on a human for her survival. Her pride fought against the gratitude she felt, but deep down, she couldn't deny that Carter had done what none of her own people could. She had survived because of him. It was a reality that gnawed at her, a truth that threatened to erode the walls she had spent a lifetime building. For the next few hours, Carter worked in silence, checking her vitals, adjusting the medical equipment, and monitoring her condition. He was focused on the task at hand, keeping his thoughts strictly professional. He had always been a man of few words, preferring to let his actions speak for him. And in this case, his actions had done all the talking. Nixari, for her part, was quiet as well. Though her mind was far from still, she had always prided herself on her ability to command respect without asking for it. She had led her people through battles, through peace talks, and through times of great hardship. But now, she found herself in a position where she had to rely on someone else, and not just anyone. A human. The thought unsettled her. "I'm not used to this," Nixari said after a long pause. Her voice was quieter now, almost contemplative. "Relying on others, especially a human." Carter glanced up from his work, his expression unreadable. "It's not easy." "I get it. But sometimes it's necessary." Nixari's eyes darkened. "We've fought your people for centuries. We've clashed over territory, over resources. And yet, you saved my life." "It doesn't make sense to me." Carter set the medical equipment down and turned to face her fully. "It's not about what happened before. It's about what's happening now. Right now, I'm just a medic doing my job. And right now, your life is my responsibility." Nixari stared at him for a moment, her sharp gaze studying him, trying to find something in his eyes that she could use to understand him. There was nothing but calm resolve there. It was the same resolve that had led him to save her life, to put aside the history between their species and focus on the task at hand. "I suppose that's all any of us can do," she said, her voice a little softer now, though she still didn't quite understand what had happened between them. "Do our jobs!" Carter gave a small nod. "Exactly." For the rest of the day, Carter continued to check on Nixari, making sure she was stable and that there were no further complications. Her condition improved steadily, but she remained restless. She had always been in control, and now she felt like a passenger in her own life. It was a feeling she hated, a feeling that gnawed at her every time she tried to sit still. At one point, Carter noticed her fidgeting with the blankets, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. He knew that, deep down, she was struggling with something far bigger than just her recovery. This wasn't just about her physical condition. It was about the internal battle she was facing, the struggle between her pride and the reality of what had happened. "Do you want to talk about it?" Carter asked quietly, his voice gentle but firm. Nixari glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by a human. But there was something about Carter that made her want to open up, even if she didn't fully understand why. "What do you want to talk about?" she replied, her voice still guarded. "I don't know," Carter said with a shrug. "Maybe you just need someone to listen." Nixari was silent for a long moment, and Carter thought she might not respond. But then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "I've always been the one in control," she said, almost to herself. "The one giving orders, the one making the decisions. But now I've had to rely on you, on a human." "It's difficult to accept." Carter nodded.
I get it. You're not used to being in this position.
"But it doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human, no matter what species you are." Nixari didn't say anything, but for the first time, Carter saw something in her eyes. It wasn't just the fierce warrior she had always been. It was something softer, something that hinted at a deeper vulnerability she had never shown anyone before. And for the first time, Carter felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something more. Something that could bridge the divide between their species. But for now, it was enough that Nixari had survived. And maybe, one day she would understand that they were not so different after all. As the days passed, the tension between Lieutenant Jeremiah, Carter and Commander Nixari began to shift. What had started as a relationship built on necessity and distrust was slowly morphing into something else. Nixari, though still cautious, had begun to relax in Carter's presence. She had seen his skill, his calm demeanor, and his commitment to saving her life. But there was more to it than that. It was the way he had approached her, not as a human saving an alien, but as someone focused on the task, doing what was needed without a hint of superiority. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps not all humans were the same. Carter, for his part, had maintained his professionalism. His job was clear: get Nixari back on her feet. Yet, as he continued to monitor her progress, he found himself drawn into conversations that stretched far beyond medicine. It wasn't that he had never been curious about the alien species. He had read reports, studied their ways, but nothing had prepared him for the complexity of Nixari. She wasn't just a leader, she was a person who carried the weight of her people's history and her own personal battles. One afternoon, Carter found himself seated beside Nixari's bed again, reviewing her latest medical readings. His eyes flicked between the datapad and her tired face. But as he glanced at her, he noticed she wasn't looking at him. Instead, her eyes were focused on something outside the window, her gaze distant.
"You're quiet today," Carter said, setting the datapad down.
Nixari didn't respond right away. She seemed lost in thought. Her eyes remained fixed on the stars beyond the ship's windows, as if they held the answers to something deep within her. Finally, she spoke, her voice slow but steady.
"It's strange," she began, her words careful, as if weighing each one before letting it leave her mouth. "For as long as I can remember, I've always been in control, commanding battles, making decisions for my people. But now here I am, relying on you, a human, to save me, to keep me alive." Carter didn't interrupt. He could hear the conflict in her voice, the struggle to accept something that went against everything she had ever known. "I get that," he said softly. "It's hard to rely on others, especially when you're used to being the one who's always in charge." Nixari's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time, Carter saw a flicker of something. Vulnerability. "I've never let anyone see me like this. Weak." "Helpless! That's not weakness,"
Carter replied, his tone gentle. "It's part of being alive, needing help sometimes. Even the strongest need it." She looked away, staring out at the stars again. "I used to think strength meant being alone, being unyielding. Now, I'm not so sure." Carter could sense the weight of her words, the depth of her internal struggle. He had always admired people who could face their fears, their weaknesses, without flinching. Nixari's words struck him because he knew that, despite all her strength, she was struggling with something deeper, something she hadn't yet allowed herself to face.
"I don't think strength is about never needing anyone," Carter said after a moment. "True strength comes from the ability to recognize when you need help, and then accept it without letting your pride get in the way." Nixari turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes were guarded, but there was something there, something that hadn't been there before. "Is that what you think of me?" she asked, her voice edged with something that could almost be curiosity. "That my pride is what's stopping me from accepting help?" Carter hesitated, then nodded. "I think pride has a lot to do with it. But pride isn't a bad thing. It's what drives you to be great. It's just sometimes it gets in the way. Makes you think you have to do everything alone." Nixari seemed to digest his words. She wasn't one to show emotion, but Carter had seen a change in her over the last few days. Something was shifting, and he wasn't sure what it meant for either of them. "I'm not used to talking like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Especially to a human. But you... you're different." Carter was quiet for a moment. 9/11. "I don't think I'm that different," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "But maybe I'm just easier to talk to than you thought." Nixari didn't respond right away, but there was a slight shift in her posture. She looked more at ease than she had in days, as though his words had given her something to hold on to. He could see that she was still fighting with herself, but something had cracked in her defenses. The following days were filled with similar quiet moments between them.
simple conversations that allowed them to understand each other on a level they hadn't before. Nixari began to share things about her people's history, about the wars they had fought, the enemies they had faced. Carter, in turn, talked about his own experiences, growing up on Earth, becoming a medic, the simple but meaningful things that had shaped his own life. They shared stories about their cultures, their people, their dreams, and their regrets. One evening, after a long day of medical checks, Nixari looked at him with an intensity that caught Carter off guard. "Do you ever wonder if all of this, the wars, the fighting, could ever stop?" Carter was taken aback by her question. It was something he had wondered many times. He had seen the destruction that war caused, both on the battlefield and in the lives of the people caught in its wake. But he had never imagined that Nixari, a warrior herself, would ask such a thing. "I think about it a lot," Carter said, his voice quieter than usual. "I mean, there's always something new to fight over, but I don't think anyone wants war, at least not in their heart. It's just, sometimes it feels like there's no other choice." Nixari's gaze softened. "I wonder if that's what we're all doing. Fighting because we feel there's no other way." Carter didn't know how to answer her. It wasn't something he had ever thought about in such a personal way. He had always seen war as something external, something to be stopped, to be fixed. But Nixari was right. War was something that started deep inside the people involved in it. It wasn't just about borders or resources. It was about fear. And that fear, he realized, was something both of them shared. The conversation ended there, but it lingered in Carter's mind. He found himself thinking about Nixari more and more, not just as the commander of her people, but as a person who had known pain, loss, and a sense of responsibility that he could barely imagine. As the days continued, Carter found himself feeling a connection to Nixari that he had never anticipated. He didn't know where it would lead or if it would lead anywhere at all. But there was something undeniable between them, something that went beyond duty and beyond the boundaries of their species. Nixari, too, felt the change, though she struggled to accept it. She had been taught to keep her emotions locked away, to rely on logic and strategy above all else. But when she looked at Carter, she couldn't help but see him differently now. He had done something no one else could. He had saved her life. And in doing so, he had shown her a side of herself she hadn't known existed. A side that didn't always have to be in control. A side that could rely on others. For the first time in her life, Nixari began to wonder if there was more to strength than she had ever realized. The days following Nixari's recovery had been filled with uncertainty, both on a personal and political level. As the commander of her people, Nixari was expected to be strong and decisive, qualities that had made her one of the most respected leaders in her empire. Yet now, she found herself caught between her duties to her people and her growing, unexpected bond with Lieutenant Carter, the human who had saved her life. The internal conflict was beginning to take its toll. Carter, too, found himself struggling with the delicate balance of his professional role and his personal feelings. He had come to admire Nixari, not just for her strength, but for her vulnerability, the part of her that she kept hidden from others. He knew that what had started as a simple medical mission was no longer just about saving her life. He cared about her. It was a feeling that neither of them could easily ignore, even if they both knew the potential consequences of what it meant. On the bridge of the alien ship, a new crisis was unfolding. Intelligence reports had come in that a faction of Nixari's own people were planning to attack a human colony on the edge of their shared space. The faction, led by a rogue general who had long opposed peace with humanity, believed that the only way to secure the future of their people was to destroy the human presence in the region. Nixari was standing at the command station, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the flashing data on the screen. The message was clear. War was imminent, unless she acted quickly. Her instincts told her to prepare for battle, to rally her forces and strike first. But something in her had changed. She had come to realize that there was more to peace than simply avoiding conflict. It was about understanding, compromise, and trust, qualities she had never fully embraced until now. The ship's communication officer, Sori, stood nearby, awaiting orders. "Commander, we've received confirmation of the rogue faction's movements. We need to act now, or the humans will be at risk." Nixari turned slowly to face Sori. Her face was calm, but inside, her thoughts were in turmoil. She had always led her people into battle when necessary, but now, the idea of doing so felt wrong. She thought of Carter, of their conversations, and the moments they had shared. Could she really justify sending her people into another war, knowing that it would only bring more pain, more suffering? "What are your orders, Commander?" Sori asked again, her voice edged with urgency. Nixari closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had to make a decision. She could not let fear guide her actions. "Prepare a message for the human colony," she said quietly. "Tell them to evacuate. We will not be attacking." The room went silent. Sori stared at her, disbelief clear in her expression. "But, Commander," I said. "Prepare the message," Nixari repeated, her voice firm. "I will not let my people fight a war that can be avoided." "Not again." Sori nodded, though she still seemed unsure. The crew had long been conditioned to follow Nixari's lead without question, but this decision was unlike any she had ever made before. It went against everything they had been taught about strength and leadership, but Nixari knew it was the right choice. She would not be the one to start another war, not when there was a chance for peace. In the silence that followed, Nixari turned away from the command station and walked toward the door, heading to the medical bay where Carter was. She needed to speak with him, to explain her decision. It was no longer just about survival. It was about forging a future, one where her people and humanity could find a way to coexist. Carter was busy reviewing medical data when Nixari entered the room. His gaze immediately lifted, and he could see the tension in her posture, the weight of the decision she had just made. "Commander?" Carter greeted her, standing up from his chair. "Is everything okay?" Nixari nodded, but there was an unfamiliar hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't sure how to explain it, but she needed him to understand. "I've made a decision," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something deeper. "I've chosen peace. I won't let my people go to war." Carter blinked, surprised. "What do you mean? What happened?" Nixari walked toward him, her steps slow, measured. She stopped just in front of him and looked into his eyes. "There's a faction within my people who want to attack a human colony. They believe that war is the only way to secure our future, but I can't let that happen. I've seen too much of the destruction that war brings. I've lived it." Carter stood still, his mind processing her words. He had never expected this. Never expected Nixari to be the one to stand down. He had seen her strength, her determination, but now he saw something else in her, a sense of compassion that went beyond her role as a leader. She wasn't just thinking about the future of her people. She was thinking about the future of both their species.
"You're choosing peace?" he asked softly, his voice full of awe. He had always believed in peace, but he had never seen anyone make such a difficult choice.
Nixari nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, and I need your help." Carter's heart skipped a beat. "My help? How?" "I need to send a message to the human colony," she said. "I need you to be the one to deliver it. To make sure the humans understand that we are not their enemies. That I'm choosing peace, not war." Carter felt a surge of emotions. He knew this was more than just a message. It was a turning point. It was the beginning of something bigger than either of them had anticipated. Nixari was willing to risk everything for peace. And now, it was up to him to carry that message. "I'll do it," Carter said, his voice firm with determination. "I'll make sure they understand. I'll deliver the message, no matter what it takes." Nixari gave him a rare, small smile. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, their eyes meeting, understanding passing between them. Carter could see that she had made her decision, and he couldn't help but admire her courage. She was a leader, not because of her strength, but because of her ability to make the hard choices that would change the future for both of their species. As the hours passed, Carter prepared for his journey to the human colony. The message was clear. The attack was off, and peace was the only path forward. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be those who doubted Nixari's decision, those who would question her loyalty. But Carter knew that the real battle was not one of weapons, but one of trust and understanding. When he arrived at the human colony, the situation was tense. The people were on edge, unsure of what to expect. But as Carter delivered Nixari's message, explaining that the commander had chosen peace, something unexpected happened. The people listened. They saw the sincerity in his eyes, the hope in his voice. They understood that this wasn't just about politics. It was about a new beginning. Back on the alien ship, Nixari stood at the bridge, watching as Carter transmitted the message. Her heart raced as she waited for a response. She had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. The transmission came through, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't expected. A sign of hope. The humans had accepted her message, and the colony would not retaliate. Peace had been achieved, but it was only the beginning. As Carter returned to the ship, Nixari greeted him with a look of gratitude. "You did it," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. Carter nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We did it." Nixari's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment, there was no need for words. They had both made choices that would shape the future. And as the stars stretched out before them, they knew that peace wasn't just a possibility. It was a reality. And that reality had only been made possible because of their willingness to trust each other.